Welcome to the world of girls' love novel, wishing you a wonderful listening experience. Cranium, Mysterious Remain Death. By Nalan. Introduction. The story revolves around the complicated relationship between two protagonists, Wasaya and Finya, and their work in the field of physical anthropology. A tragic plane crash, known as the Carter Incident, unexpectedly brings Finya and Wasaya back together. Once former classmates in a doctoral program, the two had never truly gotten along. Yet fate forces their paths to cross again. Now working as forensic anthropologists, they are assigned to the grim task of identifying the victims. However, the discovery of a mysterious skull appearing at a time and place where it should not exist, only deepens the confusion and raises unsettling questions. More troubling still is the shift in their relationship. What once was marked by tension and mutual resistance slowly transforms into something far more complex, an emotion neither of them can fully explain. Chapter 1. The 16-seater chartered plane, bound for Paris, crashed into an area of rice fields that has now been turned into wreckage. Officials presume that all 15 occupants, including pilots and crew, died. They are currently investigating the cause of the accident. The neutral voice of a young reporter speaks into the microphone in front of the crash site. Although the area was cordoned off so as not to interfere with the work of the police and aviation safety officers who were tasked with determining the cause of the accident, several media outlets were continually trying to get close and disrupt their work. A young woman dressed in a collared shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark pants exuded a confident aura. Although her eyes are visibly tired from the trip, she's looking at the scene of the accident through square-rimmed glasses. Dr. Busaya, or Bua as she was known, arrived at the crash site after receiving a direct call from her supervisor that morning. A few hours later, Bua was talking to the officer in charge of coordinating the scene of the plane crash. "Just a moment, please. I need to check the list of names first." Bua nodded as she adjusted her glasses on her nose and brushed aside a small strand of short hair that fell over her face to improve her vision. "I am replacing Professor Dr. Nisara," Bua explained, handing over her PhD student ID card, which had not yet been returned to the Graduate Studies Directorate, to identify herself. At the moment, the professor is abroad. The officer responsible for registering the people involved at the accident site looked down to consult the documents and check the list of names again. "Here it is. Professor Dr. Nisara from the Institute of Bioanthropology." Then she looked at the list until she found Bua's name, which was right below the name of the advisor, listed as the professor's replacement. "Yes, the professor is my advisor. She is attending a seminar in Panama, so she asked me to come in her place. Please sign here and we will provide you with your identification badge," the officer said in a calm voice. "If you have any problems or need additional equipment, please let me know, Dr. Busaya," the coordinating officer added, handing over the registration documents for signature. "All right," Dr. Busaya said as she handed back the signed paper. "Thank you very much for coming to help us. This way, please," the coordinator said. "The operations center and your work tent are on this side. Later in the evening, someone will take you to the accommodation. We are preparing everything. This night may still be a little turbulent." "No problem, thank you very much." Busaya positioned herself in front of the access to the crash site. It had been about 20 hours since the small passenger plane crashed in a rural area in the central province of the country. Estimates were that all 15 passengers, including the pilot and crew, had died, but the search for survivors continued unceasingly. She watched the rescue dogs actively patrolling around the site, and firefighters in fluorescent orange uniforms spread out around the area to be prepared in case new fires broke out. About 4 hours earlier, Bua had received a call from Professor Dr. Nisara, her advisor, asking her to go to the scene immediately to help the police identify the victims. Victim identification is a field of anthropology, or more specifically forensic anthropology, that is usually performed by forensic anthropologists or identification specialists. This field of anthropology studies human evolution since prehistoric times, including ancestors and close relatives of humans, such as primates and mammals, and sometimes other animals, to understand the evolutionary sequence. Bua's specialty is physical anthropology, which examines humans and primates in terms of structure and morphology, especially central bones and upper and lower limbs, and interprets how life and society evolved for the survival of the species, also using insights from social anthropology to investigate structure and context. In addition, physiological structure can be interpreted in relation to evolution prior to the modern human form. "Please come in," said the police officer in charge of the crash site, as he lifted the yellow tape that cordoned off the area of the rice field, now containing the wreckage of the plane, whose fire had already been brought under control. About 500 meters ahead, several people were working hard, and some of them were still searching for possible survivors. Bua noticed about 10 rescuers ready in the area, but they had not yet had the opportunity to start their work, as they had not yet found any survivors. It was an extremely distressing moment. Another young police officer led her to the tent, which Bua assumed was where she would carry out her work. Later in the afternoon, there will be a meeting with everyone involved. "If you are ready, you can start working now. Thank you very much for coming." "It is my pleasure," she replied. Busaya looked around the tent, which is equipped with 6 stainless steel examination tables. She's not sure how many victim identification experts have been called in, but experts in physical anthropology or forensic anthropology are not easy to find. Perhaps she's the only one. Bua did not consider herself an expert. She was still far from achieving that title, especially compared to her advisor, Professor Dr. Nisara, one of the respected leaders in the field. The professor had worked in all areas and had already assisted in several agencies. In the field of victim identification, both nationally and internationally, she was a respected authority in the area, who had assisted several national and international organizations in more than 10 countries. In terms of academic publications, although this field is not very well known, the professor has at least 30 articles published in specialized journals. She is, without a doubt, one of the prominent figures in the field. And Bua was just a PhD student. In fact, she had graduated about 3 months ago and had recently received final approval from the institution, with the dean's signature stamped on the cover of her dissertation. She could already be called doctor, but she was not yet completely accustomed to the title. She had taken some time to relax after more than 5 years of intense study in preparation for a research position at the research institute her advisor had founded. Bua packed her things, including a silver tool bag and a backpack full of clothes and essentials, and propped them on the side of the examination table, thinking that someone would soon take her to her accommodation, which would probably be a tent. Working in the field is like that. You often sleep in tents more than in hotels. She positioned herself next to the stretcher where the first bones were, brought in by the rescuers. The bones were piled up without being separated, due to the rush. Some were whole, some were broken, and some were burned. The sight made Bua exhale a long sigh before she began to search for the necessary equipment, which included gloves and a face mask. She immediately got to work. The first bone she picked up was a collarbone, still with some tissue on it since it had not been cleaned, and separated it from the pile. Piling up bones like this made her job 100 times harder, as normally the process would follow the principles of forensic evidence collection: isolate the area, photograph the items, collect them in parts, and then begin identifying the victims. By delimiting the area of the accident, taking photos of the evidence and organizing them in parts, the process of identifying the victims could begin. But look who I found here. About 45 minutes later, a voice dripping with sarcasm sounded from the entrance of the tent, making the young doctor's concentration break. "I really thought you wouldn't come." It's a voice that Bua recognized immediately, even after some time without hearing it. Although it's soft and pleasant, it's full of sarcasm and irony. As she looked up at the visitor at the tent door, she couldn't help but sigh for a second before looking away, wondering why she could recognize this woman's voice and how much it bothered her. Pinya, dressed in a light-colored rolled-up sleeve shirt tucked into dark pants, leaning against the tent entrance. With her hands in her pockets, her long, dark brown hair swayed gently in the wind, and her gaze is piercing, as if she's about to devour. "Welcome," Bua said disinterestedly. "Really? Feel free to interpret it however you want. I can't believe they asked you to help," Bua replied before bending down to focus on her work again. "If I had known before, I wouldn't have even come." Pinya had also been a doctoral student of Professor Dr. Nisara, just like Bua. However, one chaotic day, she had caused a huge commotion by accusing the advisor of favoritism, which consequently affected Bua. After that, Pinya resigned and Bua learned that she had gone abroad to continue her studies, and she had not heard from her since. "Where is your mommy?" Pinya asked about Bua's advisor. "In Panama," Bua replied in a dry tone. The two had always been at odds for as long as Bua could remember. Pinya would often tease her, calling her the teacher's sweetheart, which made Bua try not to care, thinking it was nonsense. In addition, there was Pinya's habit of stealing seminar topics to present to the teacher, which left the two almost unable to look at each other. Until one day Pinya made a fuss and resigned, leaving her classmates perplexed. Bua's disdain made Pinya approach the examination table full of charred bones, probably the result of an intense collision and fire. Bua couldn't help but look up again, unconsciously moving her glasses with the back of her hand. "Don't cry just because your mommy isn't here," Pinya said. "What do you want from me, Pinya?" "Me? What would I need from you?" "Then go play with your bones, dear." "I have work to do." "Go play with your bones, dear." "Aren't you glad to meet an old friend?" The question made her stare at Pinya's long face through her square-framed glasses, and a sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of Bua's lips. "Friend? That's an interesting choice of words," Bua said as she picked up a skull from one of the victims and held it, still keeping her gaze fixed on the woman in front of her, who had just called her a friend, although in reality. Then she continued. "You know, there's a theory that says that modern humans have a larger frontal lobe, which leads to more complex emotions, and the ability to think and analyze logic and reason more detailed than ancient humans. So, please, act like a modern human, Pinya." These words make Pinya immediately grab Bua's wrist and come closer. "You're going too far, Bua. If you have nothing else to do besides tease me, then help with the work. And then we'll fight," Bua replied, pulling her wrist back and putting the skull back in place while she searched for a glove in the toolbox to give to Pinya. "Separate this pile on the other table." Pinya shrugged, take what's offered, and started working without saying anything else. She thought back to the old college days, when the two of them would argue all day long to the point that Professor Nisara had to separate them. Bua also used to do her research at times when Pinya wasn't in the building. The situation made her find it almost comical that they would suddenly find themselves in such a tragedy, a disaster that no one would want to see. Their work was just beginning. Some of the passengers' parts were scattered across the area, covering a field and the edge of the forest for about 3 lanes. Besides, the aviation department still hadn't come to a conclusion about what happened and was working hard with other authorities to find answers. "Do you have a magnifying glass I could borrow?" Pinya asked, normally this time. "Why come prepared, right?" She still searched through her toolbox and handed over the magnifying glass. "I arrived from the airport 3 or 4 hours ago and came straight here. I was expecting you to find one for me." "So they couldn't find anyone else and had to call you?" Bua couldn't help but comment. "Still got the same sharp-tongued, huh? Be careful with that," Pinya said, picking up the magnifying glass and examining the first bone. Bua listened, let out a sigh, and returned to focusing on the important work in front of her. Chapter 2. Busaya sighed for the umpteenth time that day. Not having a moment of rest after years of sleepless studying was karmic punishment enough. But having to share a tent with Pinya? The universe was really collecting debts from the past. It didn't see her as a friend, nor did it see her as an enemy. In fact, the term personal karma seemed more appropriate. Bua stood there, looking at the sign in front of the green tent made of a material resistant to the sun and rain, which served as a dormitory for the employees involved in the operation. The tent was about 200 meters away from the accident site, in a separate area, where there were 7 other tents arranged in a line. On the tent where Bua was, there was a white sign with black letters that said Dr. Busaya Methan. However, what really bothered her was the sign just below, which displayed the name Dr. Pinyadhananan. Judging by the title doctor in front of Pinya's name, Bua could tell that she had finally graduated. After their last fight, Pinya had disappeared without a trace, and no one knew what had happened. Like Bua, she was a physical anthropology major. However, her professors often sent her out into the field, especially to archaeological sites and studies of ancient civilizations, which gave her additional experience in historical human civilizations. Bua let out a resigned sigh, accepting what seemed to be her fate, when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Pinya, who was carrying a large backpack, walked past her, deliberately bumping Bua's shoulder. For a brief moment, Bua felt a strong urge to reach out her foot to trip Pinya, but she restrained herself with great effort. You studied so hard and still managed not to evolve into a vertebrate animal? You disappeared and came back worse than before, without any manners. Although she had managed to get her foot out, her mouth was faster than her thoughts. The words made Pinya turn quickly, her eyes shining with anger as she reached out to grab Bua's collar, but Bua quickly slapped her hand away in time. It seems that the specialization has made your mouth especially sharper, Dr. Bua. Pinya said, with a mischievous smile appearing at the corner of her mouth, keeping her eyes fixed on Bua's lips. Be careful with that pretty little mouth, Dr. Bua. Who knows, one day some superior member of an inferior creature might hit you when you least expect it. And with that, Pinya turned around. I'll sleep in the bed near the entrance. You take the bed inside. It sounded more like an order than a suggestion, given Pinya's tone that made Bua irritated at the time, but she didn't answer, she didn't want any more trouble. Bua crouched down at the entrance of the tent and picked up a handful of loose soil, holding it firmly in her hand. She closed her eyes and said a short prayer, asking for everything to go well. Slowly, she released the soil she was holding in her hands, as a gesture of respect and asking permission from the spirits of the place so that she could work and rest there. This was a ritual she always performed when visiting a new place. However, this time, it seemed that luck was not on her side from the beginning. Pinya appeared again, passing by her. I'm going to eat something, Waloy. Pinya said, in a sarcastic tone, using the nickname she had given Bua during her college days, without even looking back, and then left the place. Bua decided not to fight back, it would only waste time and get in a bad mood. She knew Pinya's temperament well, erratic and volatile, as if he suffered from a nervous disorder or had an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, which affected his ability to process logical reasoning. Pinya rarely listened to what others said, she was stubborn, obstinate, and had a habit of constantly complaining. As soon as Pinya was out of sight, heading towards the temporary cafeteria, Bua went into the tent to organize her sleeping place. Of all the activities, sleeping was undoubtedly her favorite. Since it was the first day, progress was still minimal. The work became even more difficult when the people in charge decided to pile up parts of the bones that had been found. When Bua saw this for the first time, she almost lost her breath. She had to intervene quickly, asking that the bodies of the victims be left at the crash site, in their original positions. Each body should be marked with stakes and tape, separating them, so that identification could be carried out more easily and quickly, instead of trying to separate the piled bones piece by piece. Separating the bones on the left side from the right would be a difficult task. The bones that had already been piled up would need to be organized, categorized, and then it would be necessary to calculate how many bones each passenger should have, separating them by type. After that, the height would be calculated using specialized software and analyzed to determine which victim they belonged to, so that the bodies could be separated and then handed over to the police. The records of all the passengers were being collected and would be sent as soon as possible. At the same time, the aviation department was searching for the black box to find out what really happened to the plane that was now nothing more than wreckage. Bua had heard from Pinya, in an exchange of barbs during work that afternoon, that the plane had simply lost contact and disappeared from the radar. It was only when local residents called to report a deafening explosion, and when they arrived at the scene, they found the wreckage of the plane and parts of the bodies scattered throughout the area. Fortunately, no nearby residents were injured or killed, and there was no significant material damage, which prevented the tragedy from being even greater. Everyone was working intensely to discover the cause of this disaster. But what intrigued Bua the most was why Pinya had appeared at that particular time. Forget it. Pinya was none of her business. It didn't matter when she had appeared, it was best to keep her distance, Bua thought, sighing again. It was something that had always intrigued her. What could she have done to hurt Dr. Pinya so much, to the point that this rivalry would never end? Professor Nisara had never shown favoritism, at least not that Bua could see. In fact, it seemed that she liked Pinya more, since she always sent her on field missions abroad. In fact, Pinya had much more experience in the field than Bua, perhaps 100 or 1,000 times more, even though they were the same age, 34. Pinya had already faced adverse terrains and situations, no matter how difficult or extreme they were. So why did Pinya insist on picking on someone ordinary like Bua? However, she knew that thinking too much about it would only give her a headache without bringing any concrete answers. Bua decided to take a shower before looking for something for dinner. She didn't want to wait for Pinya to come back, because just thinking about seeing her at dinner time was already taking away her appetite. Besides, after sunset, the air was starting to cool down, with a soft, cold breeze that promised a more comfortable night to sleep. Bua knew that the work there would be long. However, after her first shower of the day, she ended up not going to the mess hall as she had planned. One of the officers left a meal for you. I think they noticed that you were taking too long to come to dinner and are closing the kitchen. They also asked to let you know that the meeting has been postponed until tomorrow morning. Upon hearing this, Bua immediately looked in the direction of the voice, which was coming from someone sitting on the canvas bed. Her eyes then turned to the box of food and the 2 bottles of water on her bed, next to the badge that she would wear during operations there. Pinya was already starting to unpack her suitcase, while Bua grabbed the food box and went out to look for a quiet place to eat and relax before facing the next day. Identifying the bodies was not an easy task, especially in a scenario like this, where the remains were scattered, damaged by the explosion and impact, and some burned by the fire. In fact, Bua knew that it would not be possible to send everyone back home, and not all the body parts could be recovered so that the relatives could perform the funeral rites. Some bodies would be so damaged that it would be impossible to identify them. She estimated that the work would take at least 2 weeks to complete. She hoped that she could finish sooner, but she knew that was unlikely. However, she would do her best to speed up the process, because deep down, she also wanted to avoid having to see Pinya every day, and this began to affect her mental health. It was as if being in the presence of Dr. Pinya, her long-standing karma, drained her energy, something that had been happening since her college days. Almost every day, Bua heard Pinya's name echoing through the hallways, disturbing her peace of mind. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why the teacher sent Pinya so often on missions abroad, something that made her classmates jealous. Even Bua felt this, but she understood that the teacher recognized Pinya's talent and wanted to encourage her. In the country, there were not many talented anthropologists to do this kind of work. The pay was low, the work was hard, there was no prestige, and the area was practically unknown, always relegated to the background. In fact, not even in the background, in the crime scenes they investigated, the remains left behind were only fragments, incomplete skeletons, or isolated bones. Few people were interested in these remains, but for them, these bones were like silent teachers for the anthropologists. They were excited by the opportunity to study ancient human remains or even primates, such as the tailless monkeys, ape, considered distant relatives of humans in the evolutionary line. In fact, few people had the chance to see these remains firsthand, until Professor Nisara recognized the importance of collecting and preserving these fragments of prehistoric and historic humans. She was the one who pushed for the creation of the Institute for Research in Bioanthropology, a collaboration between the public and private sectors, which received both national and international funding, with Professor Nisara taking on the role of chief director. At this institute, a large collection of real skeletons and replicas were assembled to serve as study material for students and interested parties. Professor Nisara worked hard to make this institute a reality. Bua began working at the institute as a student and eventually took on responsibilities in collaborative research projects, as well as assisting in teaching as a teaching assistant. And now she was there to represent her teacher. But that didn't mean that the teacher cared more for her than for others. Bua left the tent, not wanting to argue with anyone at that moment, so she decided to find a quiet place to eat. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, bringing a sense of calm, almost as if she were on vacation after graduation. However, the wreckage of the plane and the remains of the victims made any sense of serenity disappear. The sound of footsteps nearby made her look up from where she sat, leaning against a 7 or 8 meter tall rubber tree. When she saw who was approaching, she snorted deeply. Why couldn't fate let her rest for even an hour? The whole day had been a rush of sorting through jumbled bones until her brain was about to spill onto the floor. All she could think about was lying down and letting exhaustion consume her until she fell asleep. Please. I'm tired. And sleepy too. Bua said, anticipating what the other person wanted, as she stopped in front of her. Let me rest first. If you want to fight, fight alone. I don't even have the strength to talk to you. I just came to warn you to be careful. Does it have to be now? Bua replied as she began to eat her simple meal of rice with dried vegetables. The tiredness of the day had made the taste bland and she barely felt hungry. Arguing with Pinya Nov would certainly be a losing battle. That's all I wanted to say. Pinya said. Don't stay out too late. Those words make Bua frown. As soon as she finished speaking, Pinya, who seems to be trying to be kind, walked away from the area. Bua watched her little karma walk away, but the darkness made it difficult to see clearly. She sat there for a few more minutes after she finished eating. This was the first time she had gone out into the field outside the Research Institute building since she had graduated a few months ago. Although it was an urgent task sent by her teacher, she considered it a good opportunity to see the outside world. The only thing that really bothered her was that she had unexpectedly run into her leftover. In truth, Bua wasn't sure who had called Pinya back. She suspected it wasn't the teacher, because otherwise she would have mentioned something earlier. Or maybe the intention was to surprise her. However, a small sense of relief came over her when she thought that Pinya's presence could speed up the work, thanks to her experience and the fact that she was now there by her side. Whoever had called Pinya back had chosen wisely, because if there was anyone who specialized in anthropology besides the people at the institute who were all busy with organization and other work, it was unfortunately Pinya. Bua just hoped that her former classmate wouldn't irritate her too much during the process. She sat there for another 10 minutes, seeking peace of mind, before deciding to go back to the tent, since she will have to wake up very early to start work the next day. She hoped that her first night in the field as a physical anthropologist would be a peaceful one. But perhaps she was sadly mistaken. Chapter 3. The sound of footsteps outside made Busaya, who was about to fall asleep, to open her eyes in the darkness. She raised her arm to check the clock that read 2:28 a.m. Everyone knew that, in addition to being an expert in her field of study, she was also an expert in the art of sleeping soundly. However, being in a strange place made it difficult to fully relax. She needed to sleep at this time because she knew that if she didn't rest, she would wake up tired the next morning, possibly delaying her work. However, the sound of footsteps continued to bother her. Who would be walking around the place at this hour? Perhaps it was some local spirit, she thought. She had already made the necessary offerings and requests for permission to the spirits earlier in the evening. Couldn't they wait until she fell asleep to appear in her dreams? On the very first night, they were already trying to disturb her. The doctor turned to the side, her back to her personal karma, trying to ignore the uncomfortable presence outside. Since the beginning of the night, Finya had tried to provoke her in several ways, but Busiah decided to ignore it and not fight back. She valued her sleep too much to let herself get involved in unnecessary arguments that would only serve to irritate herself. She had even thought that, if Finya continued, she would simply sleep in the command tent and get it over with. She noticed that Finya also moved, before slowly reaching under the pillow. "Don't turn on the light," Finya whispered in the darkness. "Don't make a noise. If you hear something, don't come out." Her voice is as soft as a sigh before Busiah heard a click in the darkness. Even though she didn't know what was happening, her intuition told her that it wasn't good. She decided to follow her advice and barely dare to move. She could feel Finya carefully creeping out of the front of the tent, and she tried to unzip the entrance as quietly as possible, just enough to peek in. On the first night, the spirits around here are really harsh, Finya muttered before disappearing from the tent completely. All Busiah could do is lie still and pray that everything would go smoothly. However, the situation isn't as she had expected. Bang! It seemed that the situation would not be as peaceful as she had expected. A second gunshot rang out quickly, followed by more shots, totaling more than 10. Finya had just run out. Was she in danger? Even though she didn't like her, it wasn't like she wanted Finya to get hurt. Busiah felt like all she could do was lie there, holding her breath and jumping every time she heard a shot being fired. Within 5 minutes, Finya snapped out of her thoughts of Bua and ran back to the tent, which was lit from within by a flashlight. "We're safe now." This caused Busiah to sit up quickly, her face and eyes still showing a state of shock. Finya quickly turned on the orange field light that hung in the center of the tent. "Are you okay, Bwaloi?" Finya asked, kneeling down in front of her. "I'm fine," Busiah replied, though her expression is still full of concern. "It's okay, they've already left." "Who?" "I think they are thieves trying to steal something to sell," Finya replied, placing a hand on Busiah's shoulder. "Are you sure you're okay?" She simply nodded before Finya grabbed a bottle of water that's next to the bed and handed it to her. "Drink some water first." "Are you okay, Fin?" she asked back. "I'm fine." The police officers on duty at the scene shot them and they ran away, she said, and then get up. "Let's go to sleep, there's nothing else to worry about," she said to Busiah, who didn't respond right away. "I didn't know you carried a gun." "For emergencies only," Finya replied and turned over to sleep. "Sleep, Bwaloi. You have work to do tomorrow. If anything happens, I'll wake you up." That order disguised as advice made Busiah slowly lie down again, trying to force sleep back. She notices that her old colleague also lay down, but Busiah, exhausted, soon fell asleep. Meanwhile, Finya lay down quietly, but spent the night between naps and wakefulness. Although it was difficult to fall asleep due to the events of the previous night, Busiah ended up falling asleep from exhaustion. In fact, the next morning, she wanted to thank Finya, who at least made her feel safer by being there with her. However, when she opened her eyes at dawn, her colleague had already gotten out of bed. After the morning meeting to align the guidelines and limits of the work between the identification experts and the forensic officers of the police department, there was not much more to be discussed. The main task was to identify the passengers so that the remains could be returned to the relatives for religious ceremonies. The police were also responsible for returning them. It was concluded that there was no chance of finding survivors in the incident, and the rescue teams that were in the area were allowed to return, with only 2 units remaining in case of emergencies. As for the disturbance the previous night, the officers reported that it was an attempted robbery, something that was unfortunately not uncommon in situations like that. Fortunately, nothing was lost, as the thieves were driven away in time. That day, 2 other forensic officers from the police department joined the team, which eased the workload somewhat for both Busiah and Finya. Half an hour later, the young doctor stood in front of the body of a victim whose lower body was missing. The body had been found that morning, and officers had marked the site with stakes and yellow tape, covering the remains with separate cloths for each body. She crouched down and closed her eyes. Then she took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. "May you rest in peace," Busiah whispered to the wind, before taking another deep breath to regain her composure. She rarely had the opportunity to work on site, and this was one of the few times she had been directly involved in an accident scene, and in an event as devastating as this, it was her first time. She was not yet prepared to face something like this. She tried to focus and see what was before her as just work. In fact, the closest she had ever experienced such a thing was volunteering at an exhumation in an abandoned cemetery. There, she was not only demonstrated an unexplainable ability to predict where bodies were buried, but also excelled at driving stakes into the correct places, something she could only attribute to the supernatural. During this experience, she learned to use hoes, shovels, and other tools, helping to dig graves and exhume bones. These remains included recently deceased bodies, others already in advanced decomposition, and even those that had been dead for a long time. It was there that Bua acquired much of her skills in skeletal anatomy, in an almost mystical volunteer work. This was one of the reasons Busiah felt Finya had an advantage and was more experienced than she. Finya had plenty of opportunities to work in the field, and she was rarely stuck in a classroom. The young doctor began to search her tool bag for her gloves and tried to focus on getting started on the day's work. Files with the list of names and photos of the passengers were being organized for comparison with the remains in order to identify the victims. This was Busiah's job. She was, in words, the link between the other dead and their families. Although she mentally wished she didn't have to do this kind of task as often, she would rather be observing monkeys and studying primate extinction than dealing with such a tragedy. Her eyes fell on the charred remains before her, only a few recognizable parts. She then placed a yellow marker with a number next to the fragments and used a square to measure the parts before raising the camera hanging around her neck to take the necessary photos. The photographs needed to be taken before any of the remains could be collected or moved. The night before, she had found a right leg submerged in a drainage ditch, below the knee, about 500 feet from the site. In addition to identification, the remaining tissue fragments could be taken for genetic analysis, an additional way to confirm the victims' identities. This task was the responsibility of coroners and forensic experts. Busiah's role was to help confirm whether the parts found matched the physical characteristics of any of the passengers. Carefully, she grabbed a plastic evidence bag and began collecting the small ribs that had been scattered about. The biggest challenge was that in explosion cases, the fragments were so scattered that it was often impossible to collect all of the body parts. This was the most strenuous part of the job. Some of the officers began marking the spots where they had found fragments with small stakes, and enclosing these areas with yellow tape so that recovery could be done later. Busiah glanced at Finya, who had arrived today with a toolbox, probably requested from one of the officers. Finya was about 15 meters away, focused on her own work. When she noticed Busiah's gaze, the young doctor quickly looked away, returning to what she was doing. When she finished examining the first body, she moved to another area, further away. Dr. Busiah called an officer who was in charge of logistics and who Busiah had met as soon as she arrived at the scene. She had been sent by the aviation department to coordinate the actions between all the teams involved. The list of names and photos of all the passengers has already been sent. It is now in the process of verification. Busiah stand up upon hearing the news. If you need to use this data, you can request it at the command tent. Thank you, officer. Oh, please let Dr. Finya know too, added the officer before walking away. And he didn't even ask if I wanted to let her know. Busiah thought to herself. She looked for her small shovel and, finding it, walked over to where Finya was crouched in front of the body of another passenger, who was surprisingly not too badly damaged and appeared to have died face down. Finya observed the surrounding area, preparing to take photos before the officers came to remove the body. "Will you hit me in the head with that shovel?" Finya asked, without taking her eyes off from her work. "Self-defense. I would really love to attack you," Finya muttered as she pressed the camera button. "Who knows? What do you want?" Finya finally asked, still focused on her photos. "An officer informed me that the list of victims and the photos are already in the command tent. If you need them, we can go and get them." Finya looked at her blankly, before nodding slightly. "If you go, bring a copy for me too." "How lazy." "Sure," Busiah replied, dragging out her words wanting to be sarcastic. "What did you find today?" Finya asked, changing the subject. "2 arms and a completely mangled body. I'm not sure if it was because of the explosion or the fall. I haven't examined it in detail yet, but at least it's a complete body," she explained, making Finya let out a sigh. "This is horrible," Finya muttered. "I never liked working in disasters or explosions, especially because of this." She looked up to meet Busiah's, who looked exhausted. "Did you get any sleep last night?" "Maybe an hour. And by the way, thank you for last night," she said, and without waiting for an answer, she walked away. She wasn't sure if Finya had accepted her thanks, but at that moment, it didn't matter and she didn't care. However, Finya, who had listened, looked at her from behind, and then a faint smile appeared on her thin lips for no apparent reason. After that, the two of them didn't talk anymore, each of them sped up their work to finish as quickly as possible. It was already the 3rd day, and there was one more thing to worry about: praying for the weather to cooperate. Although Bua didn't like strong sunlight, in fact, no one likes sunlight so intense that it makes their eyes burn during the day, the last thing she wanted right now was rain, until all the bodies were recovered. Not to mention that, in the next 24 hours, the bodies or their fragments would start to be infested by worms and insects. Then, the natural process of decomposition would begin. Of course, the unpleasant smell would be something she wanted to encounter as little as possible, but she couldn't avoid it. The tent for storing the bodies recovered from the plane wreckage was set up not far from the work tent. Bodies and fragments that had not yet been identified would be taken there, separated into complete and fragmented parts, and then identified one by one. She was focused on working when she raised her head from the mound of dirt carefully removed by hand for the evidence items, and when she realized it was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She decided to go out to get lunch while her stomach growled. Even so, she still felt like she didn't want to waste time even eating. She walked slowly to the command tent to request 2 sets of name documents, hoping that if she found Finya, she could hand them over at once. When she reached the temporary hut area that had been hastily built to serve as a dining hall for the personnel involved in the incident, she noticed that Finya was talking to an imposing man dressed in a black suit not far away. Both of them had a tense expression on their faces. She assumed that they were discussing the incident from the previous night. She just hoped that there wouldn't be any more unexpected events like the previous night. For a brief moment, a thought flashed through her mind, making her heart feel strangely warm. She felt strangely comfortable and safe in Finya's presence during this time. Chapter 4. Dr. Busiah was about to have one of those headaches. The scene before her was desolate. The young woman with a PhD in forensic anthropology was leaning back and forth in front of a skull on the side of the plane wreckage, which was now in pieces after the severe impact. The wreckage was scattered everywhere, with almost no trace of the plane left. However, what presented in front of her was surprising. Bua leaned over and used the magnifying glass in her hands to examine and re-examine, not sure what she was looking for. In fact, she needed to gather the fragments she had found and put them in bags or wrap them in cloths before proceeding with a more detailed analysis to identify the characteristics and compare them with the information on the list of deceased passengers to identify who was who. Then, she would prepare a summary report, one by one. But in this case, she felt that this fragment should not be there, and that was certainly something strange. She looked around. There was no one else around. Except for her personal karma that always wore out her patients every time they talked. In fact, Bua did not know exactly what was the cause of the fight between her and Finya. Maybe it started because Finya chose a seminar topic almost identical to hers, or rather, a topic that seemed to be a copy, or maybe it was because Bua passed the qualifying examination and the PhD proposal before her, even though she had applied later. Finya might have felt uncomfortable without Bua knowing. Or maybe it was because she looked prettier, considering the ethnic categories she and Finya specialized in. If we look at it from the perspective of physical anthropology in the classification of humans according to major ethnic groups, we generally speak of three main groups: Asian, Caucasian, and Negroid. Or, to be more specific, Bua was simply prettier according to the ethnic characteristics of the region where she lived, to be exact, Southeast Asia. She was only slightly prettier than Finya. In fact, there was a reason to support this hypothesis, and, when looking objectively, she was a little shorter and smaller than Finya, with a relatively round face and a younger appearance, despite being the same age. Her hair, which was black and straight, despite having been cut and dyed, and her dark brown eyes, were longer and smaller. Her almond-shaped eyes, her nose not so prominent but harmonious with her face, and her thin and almost straight lips formed a proportionate figure. This is a typical feature of the Asian group, which has its roots in Southeast Asia. However, Finya had a taller, more robust body, with broad shoulders that widened to the hips, but with a waist that was not as narrow. Although her face was a little more elongated, with features similar to those of the Mongoloid, her large, round, brown eyes that were often half-closed, her fine, long hair, the same color as her eyes, and her lighter, yellowish skin, made Finya not look like the typical inhabitants of the region. Her nose was prominent and her lips were a little thinner than Bua's. Finya did not seem to be as Asian as Bua. Therefore, it is possible to conclude that Bua seemed more in line with the local ethnicity, according to the anthropological classification of the region. It is possible that Finya disliked her for this very reason. However, this did not seem to be the crucial point at the moment. What really worried Bua was the skull burned by small flames that lay before her. This was the real problem that made her adjust her glasses and observe the skull repeatedly for about 10 minutes. The problem was that the skull should show signs of rupture of the skin, muscles, or tissues due to an explosion, impact, or burning. However, the motionless skull before her showed dry skin attached to the bone, something that should not occur in someone who had just died or had been through an event as severe as a plane crash. Furthermore, when searching for other parts of the body, the limbs that should have presented similar characteristics were not found in the area. "What are you doing, Bua? Are you going to sleep on the stretcher? If you don't mind trying to talk in a normal way, that would be great." Bua replied in an irritated tone. There were already enough problems to worry about without having to deal with Finya's sarcasm, which was getting tiresome. Busia decided to put work aside for a moment, while other issues, such as slapping her fellow doctoral student in the face, would be left for later. "Since you're here, could you help me out?" Bua asked, seeing Finya cross her arms and smile. "Did the stars misalign today, Dr. Busia, asking for my help? If you can't help, go somewhere else, or I'll throw alcohol at you until you disappear. You get angry so easily, Bua." "So, what is it?" Bua pointed to the skull fragment in front of her, which was making her so disturbed. I'm not sure how to ask." Finya, upon hearing this, crouched down next to Bua, who noticed that she's narrowing her eyes. "Let me take a look." "Go take care of something else." She's expected an answer, but instead Bua received a direct order. "This is mine. I found it. You're the one who asked me for help. To help you I need you to let me take a look." The firm voice repeated the same answer. "Do you still have this habit of wanting to steal other people's threads, Finya? I thought that with age you would have given up on that." I've never stolen anyone's thread. Don't come with those lies to me. You're the one who likes to steal, aren't you, teacher's pet? Teacher's pet gets everything she wants whenever she wants. Finya replied back, with a defiant look. Still looking at the skull, she asked. Take a picture for me? As if you were in charge of me. Bua placed the yellow evidence identification plate and the square to mark the size before lifting the camera and starting to press the shutter button, following the instructions or rather, the orders. And I'm no one's pet. Oh, no? You were the one who sat pretty, full and comfortable in the office while I crawled around in the field, weren't you? Give me a bag of evidence. Well, the teacher wanted someone who was good at field work, and I'm not as good as you. I can barely sleep, I probably would have died the first night. With one hand she handed over the requested bag along with the sticker to seal the bag and write the details of the evidence collection. I'll take care of this one myself. Finya said before taking the bag from Bua's hand. Go do your job. Your face may not look anything like your mommy's, but you're just as bossy, right? Why is that? Bua continued to mutter, pushing the lenses of her glasses up her nose in irritation, before getting up and going back to work as she had been told, or rather, ordered. I already told you that, you don't boss me around, right? So, what's so important? Dr. Busaya asked Finya, who was standing looking at the fateful skull, which had been collected around 9 in the morning and was now on the autopsy table. They had only completed about 20% of the work, even though they had worked during the day and stayed up all night. By this time, some of the bodies or some body parts had started to give off an unpleasant odor and were decomposing over time. This made the work more difficult, as they had to fight against the smell that constantly affected their nose, and even wearing a mask didn't help much. The black box was still being searched for with no sign of being found. If I don't tell you, you'll keep annoying me like this forever, won't you, Bua? Finya asked, irritated. It's not like I want to keep talking to you, Finya. I just want to understand. Curiosity must be a genetic trait of my ethnicity. Busaya justified, looking to the side. I don't have that trait of curiosity. Then you must be of a different ethnicity than me. Bua replied as she approached to examine the skull more closely. Did you find anything? You tell me, Dr. Bua. If I knew, I wouldn't be asking you, Dr. Finya. Bua retorted. So tell me, what did you see? A skull. Really? With such a clear description, I think it looks more like a kneecap, don't you think? Finya gave an irritated look and a sarcastic comment upon hearing the answer. Well, considering the condition, the appearance of the dry and dark, almost black skin makes me wonder, but I'm not sure why it's here. Busaya looked closely before falling silent to reflect. It looks like an undecomposed body. What do you think? Mummification process. Bua answered quickly. It's not natural, because the skin is smooth and adhered to the bone evenly. If it were natural, it wouldn't be so perfect. That's interesting. With just one look and seeing just one piece, I already knew it was artificially made. Finya commented in admiration, before seeing Bua raise her hands in a gesture of reverence. What are you doing? I've never seen an artificial mummification. Busaya heard a long sigh accompanied by an expression of disdain. I've seen a case of natural mummification once, while helping to clean a cemetery. Is your job in the field to clean cemeteries? Finya said, looking at Busaya with an expression of disbelief. Why not? I'm good at digging, okay? And I'm quite skilled with shovels and hoes. Bua replied, proud of her skills. Where else would you find a complete sample of bones, divided by different ages, if not in a cemetery? Besides, it's important to understand the process of decomposition in different stages, 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks, a month, even 10 or 20 years. She continued to speak while still holding her hands together, as if in prayer. Put your hands down now, Bua. Finya ordered. That's why Professor Nisara tried to found an institute, so she could get these samples then that students can learn from real material. Bua said, with a frustrated tone. But how did this one get here? Who's the crazy guy who did this? Bua asked, shrugging. And what should we do now? I don't think this is normal. Finya opined, her eyes fixed on the mummified skull that seems to be in the wrong place. It looks new. New, what does that mean? It means it's not old. The answer made Bua widen her eyes in disapproval. Very funny, isn't it? Finya continued, not hiding her sarcasm. Look, a joke. Bua made a sarcastic comment. Come on, answer me properly. Well, it's still new. It's in great condition, with only a small burn in the region of the temporal bone on the left side. The jaw has fractures that radiate from the center point at the bottom, all the way to the base. One of the fractures has not yet healed. This could be a cause of death. Finya explained, pointing to the slight burn mentioned earlier. I think the burn could have been caused by the accident. The teeth are still quite intact, although some are missing. She indicated the dark area on her left temple. But I can't say for sure without knowing the exact age of the old object. I'm still at the new part. Bua replied, with a confused expression. Can you explain more? Judging by the condition, if we disregard the burn, it is intact and does not appear to be deteriorated to the naked eye. Finya clarified. It is quite well preserved, with no age-related deformations. The deformation in the jaw could have occurred at the time of death or it could have been the cause of death. Deterioration occurs over time, for example, deformations or changes in time are visible when wrapped in preserving substances such as resin for hundreds or thousands of years. A skull wrapped in preserved resin would begin to show air cavities and deformation or even fractures. But this one here is in excellent condition, as if it had just gone through the mummification process, but we need to use an X-ray to check for internal cavities or date it more accurately. Just gone through a process? You mean it was done recently? Bua's expression showed surprise. I'm not sure. Finya replied, her tone of indecisive. Some items can be well preserved after hundreds or thousands of years if they are well preserved and not disturbed. But this is too good. Normally there would be signs of gnawing by insects, damage, deterioration, or even fungus. I'm not sure because I haven't seen other materials to compare, such as linen used to wrap the body, jewelry, or other items. The type and age of the fabric and the method of weaving can give a rough idea of when it was made, but we need to determine the exact age first. And why does it still look so good after falling from that height? Bua asked, perplexed. I assume it was put in a safe. Finya answered, with a tone of certainty. Is that the procedure? I don't know much about it. Bua admitted honestly. Also, I noticed signs of resin applied to preserve the condition, which caused the skin to become rough, stiff, and dry. Finya said, touching the top of the skull. But perhaps it didn't go through the final wrapping with fabrics, so the bony parts of the skull are not deformed because they weren't wrapped tightly. In any case, we need to find out the origin and the legality, because if it's not legal, we'll have to find a way to return it to the owner. It's up to you. You know more about these things than I do. Bua commented, shrugging. Have you found any other parts with similar characteristics, like linen, jewelry, or something that might be related? Finya asked. I didn't find any. Bua shook her head. Just that one piece, and even if there were more, would it have survived the fire? That's why I asked if you found more. Finya replied, making Bua frown. I didn't find any. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you either. If you keep annoying me, I'll torment you all night and you won't be able to sleep in peace. Finya threatened, with a serious tone. Okay, if I find anything, I'll let you know immediately, Detective Finya. Bua replied, joking. Go to work now. Finya ordered. Did I tell you today that you don't look anything like your mommy, but are you just as bossy? Go quickly. Finya insisted, firmly. Chapter 5. That afternoon, Busaya managed to recover a few more body parts from the passengers who had died in the accident. Among the finds were a wrist, an arm, and a right ankle. These parts were almost intact, if not for the fact that they were completely separated from the original bodies and belonged to different people. She, Finya, and the forensic officers from the police department had to face the arduous task of reassembling these disconnected parts to their respective bodies. The dilemma was to join a leg to a torso, only to discover that they belonged to different individuals. The complexity of identification in disasters and accidents lies precisely in this point. The discovery of the mummified skull the previous morning still disturbed her, to the point that she could barely concentrate on her work all afternoon. It was intriguing that something like that was there, probably brought by someone who had no idea that this would be his last flight. However, when she looked through the passenger files, she noticed that some seemed to have some connection to the antiques trade, which explained a little of the strangeness of the situation. Despite her desire to delve deeper into the victims' stories, the most urgent task at that moment was to recover as many fragments as possible as quickly as possible. Bua remembered a rumor that circulates in the archaeological community about how some mummified bodies or sarcophagi have curses that affect those who disturb the eternal sleep of the deceased. Although it was not scientifically proven, she never underestimated the forces that cannot be seen. There are phenomena that science cannot explain. As a physical anthropologist, who studies the history of humanity from prehistoric times to the behavior of certain animals, she knew that there are many things that science cannot answer or that cannot be seen and explained through the eyes of science, especially when it comes to ancient times, before the emergence of science. Nature and humanity have existed for much longer than the first scientific theories, which were only developed and recorded later. For this reason, Bua has never closed herself off to stories that seem to have no concrete explanation. There are so many things in the world that are still unknown, and the curse of the mummies is one of them. It's a good thing Finya was there when it was discovered. Otherwise, she wouldn't have known what to do. Another question that arose was, how did that skull get there? Busaya had heard teachers talk about the antiques trade, where the older the piece, the more valuable it would be. The process of mummification has long intrigued and fascinated archaeologists. In addition to the method itself, which preserved the bodies in an era without chemicals, this knowledge was developed through the wisdom of the time and the resources available. Naturally, ancient relics like these would be highly valuable. In this world, there are many strange people who want to own these relics, instead of leaving them as cultural heritage and a source of educational value. Over time, these items end up being lost, without ever bringing any significant benefit. Busaya was well aware of this reality, as evidenced by a case that had recently made the news. A skull of Homo erectus, a distant relative of modern humanity, had been stolen while being transported to another country for an exhibition on evolution. The search was still ongoing, and it was almost certain that it would be lost over time, representing a great loss to anthropology. But that is precisely why they are important. Because specimens like these are extremely rare. Finding an extinct human fossil is like looking for a needle that has been dropped into the ocean. Homo erectus is one of the human species most closely related to Homo sapiens, modern humans. The name erectus refers to the upright posture, perpendicular to the ground. But why did they become extinct? This is a fascinating question for anthropologists, and these fossils could help understand, explain, or even answer that question. But unfortunately, some people prefer to display these relics in their homes, like trophies. Where should I put this? The young voice make Bua raises her head and look towards the entrance of the tent. She's alone at that moment, as Finya had left about 10 minutes ago to inspect a body found at the edge of the forest, about 600 meters from the wreckage of the plane. Put it on that empty stretcher, please. I'll finish this here and I'll check it out. Okay, replied the forensic officer, who seems to be about 7 or 8 years younger than her, before placing the newly recovered body, still wrapped in a cloth, on the bed. The officer placed the body in the place indicated by Bua. "Thank you very much," she said. Bua continued to work for several hours. Initially, she intended to check the newly arrived body, but, realizing that almost 2 hours had passed since dinner time, she decided that if she didn't finish soon, she would end up going without food. The deadline for the work was 15 to 20 days, due to the need to clear the area and make it available for local agriculture again. 20 days to locate all the bodies and identify the 15 victims with only 5 forensic experts and investigators was clearly not enough. Just putting the body parts together correctly was already an extremely complicated task. There was still a lot of work to be done, and if the police department requested assistance, the research institute would still have to deal with the remaining parts. And Bua knew that was exactly what would happen. At this point, they were reviewing passenger records to speed up the identification of the victims and to investigate anyone who might be related. Not to mention the mummy, which should never have been there in the first place. In the last 5 or 6 days, Bua and Finya had only managed to gather and identify 2 complete bodies. The process of walking the area, photographing, and then placing the remains in plastic bags took almost half a day. The department's forensic team officers were in charge of collecting tissue samples and sending them to the lab for genetic analysis, which would be compared with the family's samples to confirm the victims' identities. When Bua finally returned to her tent, it was almost 9 o'clock at night. After sitting down to eat and discussing the progress of the investigation into the cause of the accident with the director of the aviation department, and curiously enough he hadn't mentioned anything about the mummified skull that had been found, she assumed Finya hadn't informed him yet. Although she found this odd, she decided not to question it. Finya had offered to take responsibility, and she wasn't interested in prolonging a conversation with her pet stress. In fact, that conversation was probably the longest and most productive they'd had without one trying to fly at each other's throats. Perhaps maturity had softened past rivalries, Bua thought. The heated arguments of before now seemed insignificant. In truth, she had nothing against Finya. Bua saw this mission as a job opportunity, but also as a chance to contribute to the common good. In her opinion, that made it worthwhile. She wasn't sure who had asked Finya to do this, or if Professor Nisara knew about it, but since the professor didn't mention it, she figured she probably didn't know. If that was the case, Finya would already be known outside of Academy cycle. When she entered the tent, she found it empty. She decided to write the day's report before getting ready for bed. She didn't have much time to rest, and the time she did have was more sacred than anything else. She sometimes wondered if this intense need for rest was genetic or an evolutionary trait. As a theorist, Bua was an expert on the evolution of primates and mammals, especially humans and apes. Her interests focused on the evolution of human beings from prehistoric times to the present day, whether in body structure, behavior patterns, or the development of the central nervous system. She studied how these changes were connected to the more refined perception and movement of modern humans, who originated from primates. The transformation from a horizontal walking posture to an upright position, perpendicular to the ground, altered the structure of the spine, and the change in the structure of the human body over time, adapting to gravity, raises a central question: how modern humans evolved, both in terms of physical structure and survival behaviors, to ensure the continuity of their species. In addition, Bua had an exceptional ability to analyze the physiology of mammals, primates, and humans. Her extensive studies in evolutionary research gave her great expertise in identifying and classifying different body structures, such as skulls or bones of various animal species. However, the only aspect that Bua regretted was her lack of experience in the field, something that Finya easily surpassed. After about 15 minutes of rest, her irritable behavior returned. They didn't exchange a single word, and Bua was certain that Finya wasn't interested in talking either. She heard her pacing for a while before finally lying down. In the middle of the night, Bua was awakened by a noise, the same kind of sound she had heard on the night of the robbery. She noticed Finya moving, but this time, she didn't leave the tent. "Don't turn on the light," Finya whispered, as the sound of gunshots echoed. Stay quiet. Even without understanding what was happening, Bua decided to follow the instructions. She heard a familiar click and recognized the sound of a gun's hammer being cocked. The gun then pointed toward the entrance of the tent, while Finya, who was holding it, lay down. The sounds of footsteps coming from outside continued, making her hold her breath. The noise from outside made Bua's heart race, followed by gunshots that broke the silence. Then the footsteps began to move away quickly, each running in a different direction. Fire! Someone shouted outside. Don't go out, no matter what you hear. Finya ordered in a firm voice. And don't turn on the light until I come back. Finya said quickly before running outside. The shouts from outside instructed everyone to put out the fire as quickly as possible. Several times, Bua thought about going out to help, but Finya's orders kept her where she was. She knew that if she didn't obey her orders, she would probably make a fuss and be looked down upon, very badly. If she doesn't come back in 10 minutes, I'm going out. Bua thought, feeling her anxiety grow. Fortunately, about 8 minutes later, Finya came back and finally turned on the light. Bua sat up in bed, anxious for answers. What happened? Someone tried to find or destroy something. Finya replied. When I ran outside, the main tent was on fire. The work tent was also searched and was about to be set on fire, but the officers managed to prevent the worst. But those responsible managed to escape. She sighed, sitting forward on the makeshift bed. Change of plans, Bua. Maybe we should collect the bodies and take everything somewhere else. It's not safe here, there are too many thieves, and the place is too open to be properly protected. Are you okay? Bua's voice came out hesitant, without her realizing it, as she nervously adjusted her glasses and looked to the side, trying to disguise her concern. I'm fine. Finya replied, with a surprisingly soft tone. You said the work tent was searched? Bua asked again after a brief pause, frowning. What should we do now? Tomorrow, call the professor. Finya suggested quickly. Ask for permission to use the research building to store the remains while we wait for identification. It's safer and more practical there. And you, Finya? Bua asked, still uncertain about what would come next. I need to take care of a few things first before heading back. Finya answered directly. Okay, that's a deal then. Bua agreed. Rest, Boaloy. There's nothing more to fear. Finya said, with comforting firmness. Bua simply nodded before lying down again. Does this happen often when you go out in the field? In this world, there are greedy people everywhere, wanting what doesn't belong to them. Finya answered in a calm voice. I think so too. Rest, Bua. We'll deal with the rest tomorrow. Okay. This time, Bua couldn't resist and remained silent. What the hell? The already difficult job had just gotten even harder. Bua was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Which meant she would have to start the job all over again. The things inside the work tent were completely disturbed from the previous night. Some bones that had been carefully stored in bags or wrapped in cloth were all out of place. And the paperwork, where she had recorded the identification of only 3 bodies, had also been messed up. All of the work of more than a week had been destroyed. Luckily, nothing had been stolen. As soon as I finish this job, I'll put a curse on those bastards myself. Bua thought furiously. Finya's idea of collecting the remaining bodies and taking them to the research institute seemed sensible. It was better to follow through with this plan before someone came back to rummage through and destroy all the hard work they had done so far. More than a week had passed, and Bua was feeling exhausted. You have no idea how hard it is to separate each individual bone from each side of the body. Bua thought in frustration. And on top of that, there was the pressure of making sure no parts were mixed up. Even though she wanted to take some time to cool off, Bua knew she didn't have that luxury. In fact, this particular mission was taking up too much of her life. Before this, she had asked her advisor for some time to prepare for her full-time research job. She also had to start writing lesson plans for her teaching position, since she had previously been just an assistant. Not to mention the research project she had been assigned as the leader of, and now, this special assignment. There didn't seem to be any time for Bua to rest and make the transition from PhD student to full-time researcher. She sighed deeply before searching for her gloves in the toolbox and getting to work with a tired head. She bent down to pick up a forearm bone, the ulnar bone, from one of the victims that had been thrown on the floor, and carefully placed it on a cloth. Then she picked up a male skull, about 40 years old, which still had fragments of tissue attached. Bua's day was still very long. She concentrated on her work for about an hour, until the clock struck 8 in the morning. Then she got up to call her counselor, as she had agreed with Finya. Although she had not been very happy to see her at first, she now felt a certain relief to have Finya around. At least she felt like she had someone to help her think of solutions, even if she couldn't exactly call her a friend. Finya had been through situations like this many times before, which made her more capable of dealing with it. Perhaps that was why, during her studies, her teachers often sent her to the field. Maybe it was so that she could learn how to deal with these situations that were certainly not in the textbooks. There were thieves interested in stealing the wreckage of the plane or the belongings of the deceased passengers to sell them. Another possible reason could be that the teacher had to keep Bua and Finya apart, to prevent them from killing each other in the laboratory, where there were several objects that could easily be used as weapons, such as the arm or thigh bone, which were large enough to break a head, or even hammers and chisels. For Bua, modern humans were a constant source of headaches. This thought made her sigh with relief that Finya was around, even if her arrogant habits and sharp tongue had not changed. Bua went out to call her teacher. At this time, it must still be daylight in Panama, and she could see Finya outside, crouched down and hurriedly collecting remains in bags. Their work that day would definitely not end so easily. Bua decided that in the afternoon she would go out to explore and collect evidence outside the work tent, since she had spent most of the morning inside. She was walking aimlessly, carrying her toolbox and a small shovel in her left hand, when she passed what was left of the plane's tail, which was now in such a deplorable state that it was barely recognizable. She crouched down next to the wreckage and began working immediately. Despite her concentration, the question of the mysterious skull still lingered in her mind. Carefully, she began to remove pieces of the plane from the area that the police had cordoned off with stakes, where they had found parts of the victims' bodies. Without moving anything yet, she spotted a bone that appeared to be the sternum of one of the victims. Someone whose body had been so destroyed by the explosion that there were barely any bones left was trapped under a metal structure that Bua had just removed. After sighing a few times, she began taking pictures and collecting evidence, doing her duty. As she prepared to move on to the next collection point, something about 2 meters away caught her attention. Bua immediately moved closer, using her hands to brush away the metal debris, dust, and dirt from the object she saw. It was a silver box that appeared to be a shockproof safety box, about 40 by 8 centimeters. It was turned upside down, and the lid, which had been locked with a small key, was open. This caused Bua to tilt her head in puzzlement. She lifted the camera hanging from her neck, snapped a few photos, and slowly turned the box over, remembering Finya mentioning a similar box the day before. Inside the box was a roll of paper, tied with a black ribbon, in very poor condition. The paper appeared to be pulp, with some of it torn, though Bua could not tell if the damage had occurred before or after the plane crash. In addition to the tear marks, the paper was soiled with dirt and dust, and had been crumpled. From what Bua could tell, it looked very old. She tentatively touched it with her fingertips before reaching for an evidence bag to store the artifact, following standard procedure. However, something made her hesitate. Thinking for a moment, she decided to grab the radio attached to her waist and call Finya. In less than 3 minutes, Finya arrived at the scene. "Is there anything I can help you with, Dr. Busaya?" Finya's sarcastic voice caused Bua, who had her back to her, to let out a long sigh of frustration. Why do you always make me feel like I'm wrong when I talk to you, huh? Bua's tone of voice revealed her tiredness. I was just joking around a bit. Finya replied before crouching down next to Bua. What did you find, Bua? Well, I found something that I don't even know where to start asking. Bua replied hesitantly. It seems strange. The statement made the doctor who had just arrived from abroad narrow her eyes, observing the crumpled roll of paper in the direction Bua indicated. Finya, wearing gloves, picked up the curious object and began to examine it. After a few moments, Bua noticed that Finya's eyebrows were furrowed in an expression of deep concentration. It really is strange. To say that this is out of place is an understatement, considering what we found yesterday. Now in Thai, please. Bua replied. I don't quite understand what you're trying to say. This made Finya look up and give Bua an irritated look, before returning her attention to the object in her hands. This is an ancient scroll with hieroglyphics. I remember seeing something similar during a field expedition. Finya explained. It's an excerpt from the Book of the Dead. Oh, Bua exclaimed upon hearing this. The Book of the Dead and a mummy, that makes sense, considering the context. The mention of the Book of the Dead brought to Bua's mind the time she had visited a museum and seen one of these texts. It is said that in early times, the Book of the Dead was carved into stone and reserved only for the pharaohs. Later, when it became more common, it was written on papyrus, a flexible and weather-resistant material. The Book of the Dead contained spells and prayers, and was placed in tombs with the deceased, as it was believed that the knowledge contained in the book would help the soul of the deceased navigate the underworld. This book was used to overcome obstacles and fight demons on the way to the underworld, ensuring safe passage. It was a belief about the afterlife of the ancient Egyptians. Exactly. Finya agreed. Can you read this? I'm not exactly fluent, Bua. Finya replied. But I recognize the writing style. Hieroglyphics use images and symbols to convey meaning, so I can understand the general message. I'll decipher this more calmly in the tent. Then she asked for a Ziploc bag to store the roll of paper as evidence. Okay. Bua replied promptly. Thank you very much, Finya. Bua notices a glance directed at her for a brief moment before nodding in response. I'm at your disposal. She replied, before moving away from the area. Part 1, End, to be continued. Thank you for spending your time with us. New videos every day at 9 p.m. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the newest videos. See ya.